Hello, good morning, everyone. Let's begin. Today we will be doing lecture 10, and you've already saw the recordings for the bones portion. And then later on in the tutorial, I'm gonna do the muscle portion with you. So let's fill in what we can first for the bone portion. All right. So here we go. List 4 functions of the skeletal system. Okay, so that's basically like what your bone does, right? And some of it is pretty straightforward. For example, the bones are obviously there to support the body, and so we don't slouch over. It provides like a frame for everything to basically build around it. And in that frame, in that skeletal frame, they also serve to protect internal organs. Okay, so like the skull is going to protect the brain, the rib cage is going to protect things like the lungs or the heart, and the pelvic region, pelvic girdle, it's going to protect things like the reproductive organs or part of your lower bowel, right? So these are kind of obvious things. Other more subtle functions would be things like hematopoiesis, okay, which is production of blood cells, right? We learned that very long time ago. Production of blood cells from bone marrow. Okay, so there are the red bone marrow, which are the active sites of hematopoiesis. But as we age, they kind of get converted into yellow bone marrow, which are primarily for fat storage. And another function of the skeletal system is mineral storage. Mineral storage. Okay, so the one that everybody is familiar with is calcium, right? And we don't really store it as elemental calcium, right? As you learn in chemistry class, elemental calcium is quite reactive. It's gonna like blow up when it comes in contact with water. So we are talking about calcium ions. And what's the other mineral that we are storing? What's the other abundant compound that you will find, or ion that you will find in the bone? Does anybody remember? Besides calcium? Yes, phosphate was correct. Thank you. There we go. Okay, so these are some of the functions of the skeletal muscle. Sorry, skeletal system rather. Okay, the bones. Next, list 4 types of movable joints and give examples. An example of each. So here are your joints. Okay, there are 6 types of joints, 6 types of movable joints. There, don't forget, there are also the immovable joints and the partially movable, right? So these are the movable joints. And we have a pivot, which allows you to like turn your head, right? We have a hinge joint, right? Which is like in the elbow and the knee, allows you to do this, okay? There are saddle joints, which are kind of like 2 half cups, you know, kind of going together like this. If you think about like 2 like Pringle chips and then put it together like that, and then you can have 2 kinds of motion like that. And an example of that would be in your wrist bones, which is the carpals, okay? And then there is also the condyle joint, which is also present in the wrist. And over here, we have the plane joint at the kind of like the ankle position, and then the ball and socket. So I think in the lecture, I say that you don't have to know the condyle, and you don't have to know the plane joint. We're just gonna make sure that we know the other 4. So I'm gonna put it in for you. Okay, first one is pivot. Pivot. Okay, so the example is atlas, which is C1, and axis, which is C2. So it allows you to turn your head side to side. And that's a pivot joint. Second one was hinge joint. Okay. Where are the hinge joint again? Please give me an example. Anybody remember? Kind of just told you a second ago. Hinge joint. Right here, right? Elbow, hinge joint. Okay, so elbow. Specifically, it's the humerus and the radius, but we're just going to call it elbow. And then the knee as well. Another one is ball and socket. This is the most movable one. Okay, the one that offers the highest range of motion. And with more motion, it's also more likely to get damaged, right? So we heard people have like a dislocated shoulder or something like that, right? So ball and socket is going to be at the shoulder, right? So the head of the humerus, which is this part right here, it's going to fit into the glenoid process of your scapula, right? And so we're going to review some of these things in a bit. And then another ball and socket, it is the hip, right? Okay, so over here, the head of the femur is gonna fit into the acetabulum of your pelvic girdle. Okay, and if these terms sounds very unfamiliar to you, we will review them. And then another one is the saddle, right? Saddle as in like the saddle of a horse, right? So two of them cupped together. And an example of that would be the carpals. Carpals and metacarpals. Okay. That's that. Any question? Okay. Can you guys see this? Am I sharing the whole screen? You can see the skeleton, yes? Okay. So here is the skeleton. And appendicular are all these bones that are highlighted in yellow. Okay. So you have, for example, the clavicle, right? The scapula and the entire arm. Oops. And the entire arm. And then we have the entire pelvic girdle as well as the legs. So all these are considered as appendicular. The axial is kind of like a central stuff, the main frame, if you would, where everything else kind of hangs on to. So that includes the entire head, right? The skull. We have the vertebral column, right? So the vertebral column is separated into the neck region, the cervical region, the thoracic region, and then we have the coccyx region, the sacrum, and the coccyx bone. Included in the axial skeleton, we also have the rib cage, which connects with the sternum right here at the front, right? So the connective tissue is gone here. Let me see if I can just put them back in for a second. Nope. Where are they? I don't know where the cartilage are. I'm not sure how to turn it on. I mean, but suffice to say, oh, maybe here. Let's see. No, that's the skin, right? Okay, I don't know why the cartilage is not showing. But yes, there is supposed to be cartilage that connects the ribs to the sternum. Okay, but anyways, the axial again includes the skull, backbone, vertebral column, and the rib cage. Okay, so in our picture here, let's color them. Color all axial bone blue. Blue is axial bone. Okay, so that includes the skull, is right here. The vertebral column, all the way, including the sacrum, okay, and the tailbone, which you cannot really see, as well as the rib cage. Okay, so there is your axial. And then everything else is going to be part of the appendicular. Okay, appendicular. So appendicular in red. Okay, so we have the clavicle, the entire arm, okay, humerus, radius ulna, carpals. Okay. There is the pelvic girdle and the entire leg. Okay. So if I ask you, right, on the test, select all the bones that are part of the appendicular skeleton, then you would know which one I'm talking about. So these are appendicular. Is that okay? Any question? No questions. Okay, then let's take a look at the next one. Example of flat bone. Okay, so if you go back to the skeleton here, bones that are flat. I mean, you have a couple of choices here. Like all the bones in the, most of the bones in the head are kind of flat. Okay, so like for example, like this one, right? That's pretty flat. Let me see if I can isolate it for you. Isolate. There, right? That's relatively flat. Okay, so that's a parietal bone. It's right here, covering your parietal lobe. Okay? And you can choose another one if you want. This one here, frontal, that's also pretty flat, right? Okay. I mean, it's kind of like a semicircle, but flat as in like a big flat surface, if you would. Okay, so those would be good. What's the next one? Next one is long bone. Right? So long bone is easy. There is a long bone. The humerus, right? The funny bone. There's another long bone, the radius, and the ulna. Okay, so these are all examples of long bone. Short bones would be, I know it's tempting to say, you know, these finger bones are short bone, but these are, you know, by definition still long bone. Okay, long bone, it's kind of like rectangular in shape, whereas short bones are kind of like square in shape. So these bones in the wrist, the carpals, these ones, those are the short bones. Okay, and we have irregular bones. Irregular bones are bones that look like strange in shape. It doesn't really fit in other categories. Does anybody have examples of irregular bone for me? Irregular bones that you remember from the lecture.
The scapula.
The scapula? Yeah, I mean, yeah, sure. I mean that could also be kind of flat, but it's arguable.
Hip bone.
Hip bone, yes, the right here, right? This thing, right? Okay, so this is sort of a irregular, but also kind of flat, right? So some are kind of ambiguous. It's hard to distinguish. I would say like the sacrum, right? Sacrum is pretty irregular. Like, I mean, if I take a look here, right? Like the, oops, sorry. Just trying to click on the sacrum here. Right. I mean, that looks pretty irregular, right? It looks like from space, right? With all the holes and everything. So that would be my favorite pick. And then another one, maybe. Anybody know this one? In the head, the cornerstone of your skull, right? This one. Let me isolate it, right? The sphenoid bone, right? That's pretty irregular, I would say. Okay, and you can see over here, right? The sphenoid bone. At the top, there's a little groove here. Does anybody know what sits in this groove? What brain part sits in this groove? what brain part that we have learned is that shape, and it's going to fit right in there. No? The pituitary gland. Okay, so the pituitary gland sits right there. It's protected by the sphenoid bone. Okay, so those are my favorite picks for irregular bones. But yeah, you should be able to identify them on a multiple choice question. Okay, so flat bone, right? We're saying like parietal bone, maybe. Oops. Parietal bone. Right. Frontal, maybe. These are all kind of flat. Okay, long bones, we have humerus, femur. Okay, feel free to fill in a few more. Short bones are like carpals, tarsals. Tarsals are like the feet version of carpals, right? Irregular bone, sphenoid, and sacrum. Okay, next we have to list the names of the 7 bones that form the eye socket. Right? Another name for eye socket is your orbit, right? Your orbit. 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 Right, so let's go back to that thing here. Okay, how does this work? Let's turn off everything except for our head. Okay. Turn off that. Turn everything off except for the head. Where's the head? Sorry, they keep on changing the interface. So it's hard for me to keep up. The skull is right here. Okay, bones of the head. I got it. Okay, so let me turn off everything. And then bones of the head right here. Oh, there we go. Okay. There's our head. Okay, so that's the eye socket. And we're gonna take a look at the 7 bones. Okay. As I'm telling you the 7 bones, make sure you write down which bone forms which part of the orbit. And so for example, the frontal bone. Okay, so we have one frontal bone. It actually goes deep into your eye socket at the top. Okay, so the frontal bone forms the top of your eye socket, the superior. Okay, you should fill this in as we're talking about it. I don't want to switch back and forth. Okay, but go here. You can write one frontal. Okay, and then you can say forms the top of the eye socket. Okay, the superior side of the eye socket. Is it okay? Do you guys understand what I'm saying? And so you fill it in. Okay, I'm just gonna point it to you so you can see it as well. Okay, so frontal. The spelling is here. Frontal. Frontal. Okay. If you stare into the empty eye socket of the skull, you'll be looking at the sphenoid bone. Okay, sphenoid. Excuse me, sphenoid bone. Yeah, that's the butterfly bone that I was showing you, right? Let me see if I can isolate for you one more time. There we go. That's the sphenoid bone. So you'll be staring at the back of the sphenoid bone. Okay. Now, a couple of interesting things here in the sphenoid bone. It spans from one side of the head all the way to the other side. Okay. It's the bone where every other bone in the head, except for the mandible, will be connecting with. Okay, will be articulating with. Articulation means to connect with. There are 2 gaps here at the back, 2 holes here in the back. Can you guess what those holes are for? These holes. Okay. The pituitary gland sits here, but what are these 2 holes for? What goes through them? I'm going to go back here, show you what goes through those holes. Probably easier with my finger to control it. Okay. What do you think? What goes through those holes? That hole, that hole. What passes through it? Optic nerves, excellent, Abdullah. That's what they are for. Okay, so that's the sphenoid bone, and that's how you spell it. And that forms the back of your eye socket. Okay, and you should be writing this down right in the study guide right here. Okay, next one on the side, we have the cheekbone, which is called a zygomatic. Zygomatic forms the lateral side of your eye socket. Okay, so one frontal, one sphenoid, but then we have two zygomatic, one on the left, one on the right. You have two cheeks. Okay, the prominence of the cheek, right, like right here that you can feel, that is your zygomatic bone. Okay, at the bottom, we have the maxilla. So maxilla forms a majority of the bottom of your eye socket. Okay, let me try to make this a little bit smaller. Right here. Oh boy. There. Okay, so forms the bottom of your eye socket and actually a little bit of the middle as well. Okay, not the entire middle. The middle is made up of 3 bones, and the maxilla is the most forward, the most anterior one. Okay, I'm just going to isolate the maxilla for you to see. Okay, so there is your maxilla. It looks like that. So it has the grooves for your upper row of teeth. And then here, right? Do you remember we talked about this in the, what was it? Digestive system, right? That the maxilla forms part of your heart palate, right? Okay, heart palate. So right here, that's the maxilla. Okay, and then it forms the bottom of your eye socket as well as part of the middle. Okay, so you have one maxilla. Please write down. Okay, so let's continue to look at the middle. We also have the lacrimal bone, okay, which is where your tear ducts goes into. So there's one lacrimal bone on the left, and then one lacrimal bone on the right. And behind the lacrimal bones is the ethmoid bone. There's only one of them. Okay, it's big. Let me isolate it. There you go. That's the ethmoid bone. Okay, so it forms part of your nasal septum, but this would be the medial side of your eye socket. Okay, there is your ethmoid bone, and that I would say is another irregular bone. Okay, so on the medial side, right? 3 bones. We have the maxilla, lacrimal, and then ethmoid. Okay. So how many bones we have filled in right now? I didn't keep track. We have 6 so far, maybe? Okay. I'll just think we have 6. There's a 7th one, okay, which is right here. There's a little bit there. It forms like just a tiny piece of your eye socket. And that's the palatine bone. Okay, so it's hard to see the palatine bone right here with everything kind of hiding. So let me see if I can isolate it. Isolate. There we go. That's the palatine bone. Okay. So this little knob at the end, that goes to your eye socket. And then it comes all the way down. And these form your heart palate. Okay. So in front of this was the maxilla. And then this forms the posterior 1/3 of your heart palate. Okay. So there you have it. Those are the 7 bones. Okay. Any question about the what we're talking about here? I think the diagram needs to be reset. It's going all over the place. What? You've reached your 10 free views this month? That's not fair. What am I gonna do? Hold on. What? This never happened before. Anyways, maybe we cannot use it for the time being. I'll see if I can bring it back up later on. But that is that. Okay. Next, list the various sections of the vertebral column. So we have the 7 cervical, 12 thoracic, 5 lumbar, 1 sacrum, and then about 3 to 5 coccyx. Okay.
Are you sure?
Say that one more time.
Coccyx. I mean, is it 3 to 5 coccyx?
Yeah, 3 to 5 coccyx. Yeah, fused together, of course. Right?
Not the opposite.
What do you mean not opposite? Like
sacrum, I believe that 5 bones fused to 1 sacrum. Isn't it?
Yeah, it's 5 bone fused together to form a sacrum. But it's just one fused bone, right?
But coccyx can have really 3 to 5.
Yeah, I think so. Like the tail bones, right? Like the little things at the end, right? Let me show you. I guess we'll search it up to show you. Coccyx bone, like this stuff at the end, right? So it could be like 3 to 5 fused together. You can see here, right? Like, you know, that's showing maybe like 1, 2, 3 right there. Okay, but some people have a little bit more. That's the coccyx bone. Okay. All right, give me 1 second, guys. I'm going to try to bring back the skeleton because I need the skeleton to talk about some of the other stuff. I'm just going to pause my screen sharing for, and then I'll come back. Okay. So where were we? Okay, let's take a look at the next one here. Okay, complete the following chart for calcitonin and PTH. All right. So this was done in the lecture recording, but let me quickly go through it with you, just like last time, so you can see what you know, how they're related. Okay, so please copy this down. So here in the center we have homeostasis. For blood calcium. Okay, so you don't want to have too much calcium or too little. One of the functions of calcium is it controls the release of like neurotransmitters, right? And you also need calcium for muscle contraction. So if you have too much calcium, it might lead to muscle spasm or like unwanted twitching. If you have too low of calcium, then you know, maybe you're going to have trouble transmitting neuronal signal impulses. So we want to keep it at a normal homeostatic level. But you know, there are various things that could lead to an increase in blood calcium level. Okay, so if you have increased blood calcium level, right? What will happen? Well, that is going to trigger the release of calcitonin. Okay, the release of calcitonin. Does anybody know where is calcitonin released? Some of you must have watched the lecture. Tell me, where is calcitonin released from? No? Thyroid gland. Do you know where the thyroid gland is? Thyroid gland is right here. Okay. So that's the gland that could get big, goiter, if you, for example, don't have enough iodine. Okay, so in response to an increase in blood calcium level, your thyroid gland will release calcitonin, which is a hormone. So what will calcitonin do? How is calcitonin going to bring the calcium level back down? A couple of things it can do. Okay, so number one, it's going to deposit calcium ions into bones, right? What's better place to put it than the bone? Right, so you're going to put all these extra calcium, put it in the bones. Second, it's going to reduce calcium reabsorption at the kidneys. Okay, so remember, at the proximal tubule, at the collecting duct and the distal tubule, that's where we can do that's where we can do some of the reabsorption, right, of material from the nephron. And so in the presence of calcitonin, we are going to reduce the amount of calcium that we take back from the filtrate. We don't need it. We have a lot in the blood already. So together, these actions will reduce the calcium level, bring it back to the homeostasis. Okay. So the opposite could happen. You have decrease blood calcium level. Okay. You don't have enough calcium. So what's going to happen? You will release another hormone. What is the name of the other hormone? Anybody? That's opposite of calcitonin. What is it? Anyone at all? Yep, PTH is correct. Thank you. Release of parathyroid hormone, okay, which is PTH from parathyroid gland. Okay, so the thyroid gland, if you look at it from the front, it's gonna look like kind of like a butterfly or heart shape. And then if you take that and then you flip it and look at it at the back, so this is front, anterior view. If you look at it from the back, there's going to be like 4 little knobs on it. This is back. And so these little knobs, those are the parathyroid gland. Okay, this whole thing, that's the thyroid. So parathyroid gland will release the parathyroid hormone, or PTH for short, which would then try to do things to bring the calcium level back down, because the problem back up, because the problem is we have too little calcium, right? So where do we get calcium from when we don't have enough? Well, you are going to basically release calcium from bone. Okay, so you don't want to have chronic high level of PTH, because you're gonna, in the presence of a lot of PTH, you will keep on absorbing calcium from the bones, making the bones weaker, of course. And then what else are we gonna do? We are going to increase calcium absorption at kidneys and intestine. Okay, so hopefully all these things will bring calcium level back up. Okay. So calcitonin and PTH, they are antagonistic hormone. Okay. Last week, we also learned another pair of antagonistic hormone for regulating blood sodium level, essentially, right? Which in turn controls blood pressure. What were the hormones from last week? Just want you to think about it. Okay. Well, tell me if you know. We did a similar chart last week, right? Okay. What was the antagonistic pair? Anybody? No? Okay, well, let's take a look from last week. What lecture was last week? Number 9? It was this one, right? ANH and aldosterone. Okay, so you should practice drawing these things out to help you memorize them. Okay. Let's see what else we're gonna do. Okay, so that's done. And then it's the muscle stuff. Okay, so before the muscle, let's quickly talk about some of the bone things in case you forgotten. Okay, so there we go. Full screen. Okay. All right, so this one is not gonna expire, hopefully. Okay, so a couple of things that I want to go through with you. For example, right here, this is the occipital bone. So if I isolate the occipital bone, you can see at the bottom of the occipital bone, there is an opening, right? That's for the spinal cord to come out, right? The medulla oblongata is going to transition into the spinal cord as is coming out from this hole. What is the name of that hole? Anybody?
Foramen magnum.
Foramen magnum, that's correct. Okay, so a foramen, F-O-R-A-M-E-N, F-O-R-A-M-E-N, a foramen is a hole. So we learn about different foramens. Okay, so this is one of them. This is the foramen magnum. Okay, M-A-G-N-U-M. Now on the lateral side of the foramen magnum, you can see there are two little knobs here. Okay, there is a kind of like a semicircle knob like that. So those are called the occipital condyle. All these are in your PowerPoints, by the way. And that is going to form an articulation with your C1. Okay, so let me see if I can isolate the C1 and C2 here. It's probably not very easy to do. I don't think you can isolate two things at the same time. So there is the first one, right? Okay, I can zoom in for you. Okay, there is the first one, the C1. Okay, and then the C2 is right below it. Okay, so let me isolate C1 to show you first. Okay, so there's C1. There's a hole in the center for the C2 has a little protrusion. Okay, so that's gonna go right through this opening right here. And these two groove indentation, that's for the occipital condyle to sit on. Okay, so when the skull sits on it, allows you to nod the head. All right, and then the C2, let me just quickly go into the C2 for you. We actually have models for all these things in the classroom. It's much easier to show you with a physical model than a computer model. Isolate right here. Okay, so there is the projection that would fit into the hole that we saw in C1, and then that forms a pivot joint, allows you to, shake your head side to side. Okay. So let's quickly talk about the spinal cord. The spinal cord. Let me see if I can just show you one of them. Isolate right there. Okay. So in the spinal cord, there are a couple of things you should know. This hole in the middle, this the backbone. I'm sorry. What I mean is the backbone. Okay. There are a couple of things you should know about the backbone. The hole in the middle, that's for your spinal cord to go through. Okay. This is where like the bone marrow is. You have the superior articulate processes. Okay. And then at the bottom, you have the inferior articulate processes. Okay. So let's say this one is T7. Okay. T7. So these two superior articulate processes will form a joint, will articulate with the inferior process of C6 on top. Okay, again, this is 7, right? So on top is number 6, and at the bottom is number 8, right? Okay, so the superior process will connect with the inferior process of the one above, and then the inferior process will connect with the superior process of the one below. At the back here, there's a long one that's called the spinous process. You can kind of feel it, right? Like if you just move your hand at the back here and go down the middle, you can feel those little ridges, little knobs, right? As you move down the center of your back, you are basically feeling like the tips of these spinous process. Okay, so there you have it. Let me just zoom in a little bit more for you. And so these are the ridges. You can even feel it in the neck, right? Sometimes. Okay, so maybe you can see this, maybe not. There, the inferior articular process forming a joint with the superior articular process of the next one. Okay, not super clear in this picture, in this diagram, but there is supposed to be like a hole between the two articulation. Yeah, I think there's a better picture maybe in the PowerPoint. Okay, but between the two vertebrae, there is going to be an opening called the intervertebral foramen. That's where your spinal nerve comes out. Okay. Let's take a look at the scapula. Okay, a couple of things here for the scapula. The scapula here has a little hook, right? Call it acromion. You don't have to know that, but it forms an articulation with the clavicle here. Okay, so your collarbone, right, starts at the center, at the midline, where it connects with the manubrium of the sternum. You have to know that one. The sternum has three parts: the manubrium, the body, and then the xiphoid process. Okay, so at the top here, the manubrium is going to connect, it's going to articulate with your clavicle, and it goes all the way to the back where it attached to your scapula. Okay, now what's important is, let me take away the arm here. You can see on the lateral side of your scapula, there is a groove, right? Okay, that's the glenoid process, glenoid, glenoid process. And that's for your, the head of the humerus to fit in. Okay, so you can see on the other side, right? This is the head of the humerus, and then it fits right in there. So you have all the muscle here, the deltoid, right? That will stabilize this joint along with like ligaments and stuff like that. Okay, so that's this ball and socket joint. Okay, so the hand, we have the humerus. Okay, and then the forearm. You have two bones. If you're in the anatomical position, which is what this picture is showing, the lateral bone is the radius. The medial one is the ulna. Okay, so when you eat chicken wings, you are basically eating this part of the chicken. Okay, so like this would be like the drumstick part for the chicken, and then this would be the wing. Okay, so these are like homology, right, between species. And of course, the chickens, they don't have all the hands. They just have the, I don't know what you call that part, like the tip, right? That you either love or hate. But we, of course, have the hand. So these small bones, they are the carpals, C-A-R-P-A-L. Okay. And then we have the metacarpals. And then the finger bones are the phalanges. Okay. Phalanx for singular, phalanges are plural. Okay, so 7 carpals, right? And then we have the 5 metacarpals and 14 phalanges. Okay, over here we have the coxal bone. That's C-O-X-A-L, coxal bone. I cannot write on this thing, sorry. So I just have to like spell it out for you. Coxal bone, C-O-X-A-L. Or coxa, C-O-X-A, that's fine as well. So that's made up of 3 bones. Okay, I'm going to delete this guy. Okay, so we have the ilium at the top. Ilium. Okay, so imagine like you just bought grocery, you got a big box, and then you gotta open your door. Okay, so you put the box on your hip while you search for your keys. Okay, so the box is resting on the iliac crest. Okay. And the iliac crest forms part of your acetabulum. Okay, the acetabulum is the socket for the head of the femur to go into. Okay, so just like the shoulder, we have the head of the humerus going into the glenoid process. At the hip, we have the acetabulum. Okay, at the front, we have this pubis. the right pubis connects with the left pubis at the front with a bit of a cartilage. Again, I don't know why the cartilage is not showing up, but that is the pubis symphysis. Okay, we can label it later. There is a hole here. This hole is called the obturator foramen. Again, in your PowerPoint, obturator foramen. That's for blood vessels to go through. Okay, so you have blood vessels and veins and nerves that are coming down, and then if they need to go to the legs, they have to go through this hole. Okay, so that when we sit down, we're not going to be sitting on our blood vessels, stuff like that. Okay, so this hole here, it's bigger in a female because if they become pregnant, the baby has to go through this this opening to come out. Okay, so that's why, like, after a certain gestational period, then you have to induce the baby to come out. Otherwise, if they get too big, the head will physically not fit through this opening here. Okay, so the coxa has the ilium, the pubis, and there is the ischium. Okay, so the ischium is what we are sitting on right now. Okay, so this knob here, the ischium. Okay, I missed something on the rib cage, so I just want to remind you that there are 7 pairs of true ribs. Okay, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. These are true ribs because they have their own cartilage. Okay, so this rib has the cartilage that goes to the sternum. Okay, so each of these 7 true ribs has cartilage that goes to the sternum, and then the rest of them are called false ribs. Okay, the remaining 5 pairs. Okay, because they either don't have any cartilage, or their cartilage fused with the 7th cartilage before going to the sternum. Okay, so these last 2 pairs, they are part of the false ribs, but because they don't have cartilage, they are also called the floating ribs. Okay, let's quickly take a look at our legs. We got the femur here, the longest bone of the body. Okay, we got the patella, which is your kneecap. This is the tibia, and then you have the fibula on the side. Okay, tibia, fibula. Right, just like the forearm. The forearm, we have the ulna in the middle, and then the radius on the side. Okay, so in the legs, we have the tarsal instead of the carpals. Okay, so in the carpals, you don't have to know any of the carpals name, right? Okay, but for the tarsals, 2 of them are specials, so you have to know them. One of them is this big one that forms your heel. It's called the calcaneus. Okay, there is the talus here, like the phone company, but with an A. Okay, talus, talus, sorry, and calcaneus. These are 2 of your tarsals. Okay, the rest of them you don't have to know. So there's one here, 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 here. Okay, so together 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Metatarsals, and then phalanges again. Okay, so this model is actually available to you on eCentennial under the study resources, and then there's 3D model. So you should definitely take advantage of it to help you memorize it. Okay. Moving on, let's fill in some of these things. Bone cells. Bone cells. What do we call bone cells? Bone cells are called osteocytes. Okay, osteocytes. During development, cartilage and connective tissues are replaced by bone in a process called ossification. The surface of bone is covered by a layer of vascular connective tissue called the periosteum. The shaft of a long bone is called the diaphysis. Okay, so like if you have a long bone, like the femur, that's the diaphysis. Okay. The ones at the end, that's the epiphysis. Structural unit of compact bone is called osteon. Osteon. Okay, so here is like compact bone, right? You can see the periosteum on the outside. It covers like the surface of the bone. It's quite thin. It's covering the surface of all bones. Provides attachment sites for tendon. Okay, tendon connects muscle to bones. You know, blood vessels and nerves, if they need to go into the bone, they would connect with the periosteum. Okay, and you can see these rings, right? So each one of these rings, like this whole circle that I'm going around with my mouse, that's the osteon. Okay, so in the center of the osteon, you have the central canal where the blood vessels are going to be coming up. That's okay. So this would be like if you take the shaft of the long bone, like the femur, and you cut it this way, and then you look at it under the microscope, that's what you will see. Okay, so at the center, right, the compact bone becomes the spongy bone. Okay, and then eventually at the center, that's where you will find the bone marrow. Okay, so while we're talking about this, we should mention that there are two types. There are like three types of bone cells, actually. There's the osteocytes that we talked about. Right? They are responsible for maintaining the matrix of the bones. And then there's the osteoclast and the osteoblast, right? So osteoblast is responsible for depositing calcium into the bone. And then the osteoclast would be responsible for dissolving the bones. Okay, so we talk about the actions of calcitonin and PTH. Right, so calcitonin will be responsible for promoting the deposition of calcium into the bones because you have too much in the blood, right? So that will stimulate the osteoblast to do it. So they will put more bones here. Whereas the osteoclast would be active when you have a lot of PTH. So it will dissolve more of the bones from the center. So as the bones are being dissolved, right, it leaves behind these spongy structure. Okay, it becomes the spongy bone. All right. So as we grow up, well, I mean, like, I certainly don't grow anymore. But like, you know, if you think about like a kid growing up, what their bones will be doing is they will take the bones from the center, they will absorb it, right, through the osteoclast, and that will release the calcium and the phosphate, and those will be used to build extra layer on the outside. Okay, so the bone can get bigger and bigger and bigger, right? Okay, eventually this process will slow down and stop, but that's called bone remodeling. Okay, so something our bone cells specialize in breaking down bones. We just talked about that. That's the osteoclast. And then depositing calcium. That's the osteoblast. Okay, B for building bones. That's how you can remember it. The calcified matrix of compact bone. So that's referring to all this material here. Okay, all these things that makes up the osteon, all the, you know, the bone stuff basically. That is called the lamina. Okay, it's made up of various compounds containing calcium and phosphate. And then there are pockets that are found throughout the osteon. Okay, so here is an osteon. Okay, and then there are like pockets. They didn't show it in the model. That that we were looking at, but there are these little pockets. The pockets, they are called lacunae. Okay, lacuna for singular, and then you add an E for plural. That's where you will find the osteocytes. Okay, and then radiating from the lacuna, okay, you will have these little channels. Okay, because the lamina is solid, right? The bone cells can't really move through like a brick wall almost. So by having these little cracks, it allows the bone cells to move from one place to another. Okay, so these are called caniculi. Okay. Oops, caniculi. Okay. The something bone houses the ear. That is the temporal bone. Houses the ear canal, I should say. Okay, ear canal. The maxilla and palatine form the hard palate of the oral cavity. We saw that earlier in the 3D model. Okay, a large hole found at the base of the occipital bone, that is the foramen magnum. Okay, big hole, that's basically what it means. The something bone forms the back of the eye socket, sphenoid. Right, the butterfly-shaped bone, where all other bones connects to. The mandible forms the lower jaw. It's the only movable bone in the head. And then it forms a joint with the temporal bone. Okay, like right here, right? Around this area. So if you move your jaw, some people can feel the MTJ, the mandibular temporal joint kind of clicking. The prominence of the cheek, that's the zygomatic. C1 and C2 are atlas and axis. Okay, if you're confused, alphabetically, L comes before X. So C1 is atlas, C2 is axis. The spinal nerve exit through openings called intervertebral foramen. Okay. Three part of the sternum I showed you, right? The manubrium, the body, and then the xiphoid. Remember, like this, right? Like a pencil. Right? This is the eraser at the end. This is the tip. This is the main part. Right? So manubrium, body, xiphoid. The radius, which is the lateral one, and ulna, which is the medial one. Medial means the inner one, right? They form the forearm. Knee and elbows are example of hinge joint. Number 23, the phalanges are bones that forms the finger and toes. 14 on each hand, right? And each foot. The coxal bone are formed by the three bones that we talked about. The ilium. Don't confuse this ilium with the other ilium, right? And like the intestine, right? That one spells with an E. So ilium, pubis, and the ischium. That's how you say it, ischium. The head of the femur joins the coxal bone at the acceta Acetabulum. The two coxal bone joins anteriorly at the pubis symphysis. Okay, the one that was not joined, right? Kneecap, that's the patella. Heel bone, calcaneus. Parathyroid hormone is secreted from the parathyroid gland. Something lowers blood calcium level. That is calcitonin. And this hormone is secreted from the thyroid gland. If a kid does not have enough vitamin D, they will not have enough calcium to ossify their bones. And it's going to have a condition that is characterized by bowl-shaped legs in kids. That's called rickets. Okay. We will fill these in after we do the muscle lecture. Okay, so let's take a quick break. When we return, we will do the PowerPoints for the muscle. You can download a copy of the PowerPoint slides and follow along in last week's news item. Okay, so we will resume in 5 minutes. I'll see you at 9:40. Okay, let's keep going. So muscular system. I will keep it like as condensed as possible without going into too much of the details. All right, so please stop me if you have questions. So first of all, we have, I'm actually going to turn off my my camera, so it's not going to be in the way. Let me see. There we go. Okay, so the function of the skeletal system, right? We talk about the ones for the bones, and now we're going to talk about for the muscles. Okay, so again, it's also going to play a role in supporting the body. And the muscle is going to constantly contract, especially the for the postural muscles. So when even when you're sitting here, right, the back muscle, they all have to continuously contract so that you don't fall over because of gravity, right? Yes, we didn't fill in 32 to 36 yet because those are for the muscle. Okay, so like we will fill it in after we have the muscle PowerPoint, right, which is what we're doing right now. Okay. And then the next function is it will make bones and other body parts move. The bones cannot move on their own, right? The bones cannot contract. The bones just forms all these joints, all these pivots, but something has to pull on them. Okay, and that will be the job of skeletal muscles. Okay? Maintain constant body temperature. When you're cold, you shiver. Shivering is essentially autonomic contractions of skeletal muscle. And by contracting, you are using up ATP, which would then generate heat in the process. Assist fluid movement in cardiovascular and lymphatic vessels. We talked about this when we had the discussion on the cardiovascular system, especially in the veins, right, where the pressure is really low and there is not enough pressure to cause the blood to go back to the heart. It is the contraction of the calf muscle, for example, that will help you, pump some of the blood forward. Same goes for the lymphatic system. Lymphatic system does not even have a contractile organ like the heart, right? So all the movement of the lymph inside the lymphatic vessels, that has to rely on the surrounding skeletal muscle. And bones protects the internal organs, but don't forget the bones are all surrounded by muscles as well. So there's some protection for the bones from the muscle. And of course, they help stabilize joints. So those are the functions of the skeletal muscles. Quite obvious, I would say, maybe with the exception of like the fourth point. That's a little bit subtle, but everything else should be self-explanatory. Okay, structure and organization. Okay, so I'm gonna draw a picture with you to show you, you know, what the organization looks like, and I encourage you to draw it together with me. Okay, so over here, let's take a look at this. So seriously, like try to draw with me to help you understand, and get some highlighters in the process as well. All right. So we have the bones here, the bones, one bone, and we are going to have a muscle on the bone. Okay, so the muscle will attach to the bone through the tendon, because there is the muscle. Okay, so that's the muscle. Okay, and then there is the tendon. Okay, tendon, it connects muscle to bone. Okay, so like this tendon would probably be like on another bone. Okay, you will never have a tendon, the tendons of the muscle connecting to the same bone. It's always going to be to like another bone, but that doesn't really matter. Okay, so what you need to know is that there is a muscle here on the bone. So we're gonna cut this muscle. We're gonna take the muscle and then we'll cut it, and then we're gonna take a look at what it looks like. Okay, so there we go. I haven't drawn this for a long time, so hopefully I will be making sense here. So there. Okay, I take this whole thing and then I do a kind of like a transverse cut, and that would be what it looks like. Can you imagine? Like if before you cut it, it would look like this, right? This whole thing, and then now I cut it. It's gonna be like this. Okay. So the entire muscle is actually covered by a connective tissue. Okay, so it's going to be covered by this connective tissue that I'm trying to draw right here. Okay, connective tissue. And it's going to be covering it for the entire muscle. Okay, I'm gonna stop here. I'm not gonna shade in the whole thing for a reason that I'll tell you in a bit. Okay, but if you're drawing along with me, that's what this is. Okay, so this blue thing is called the epimysium. It is a connective tissue covering the entire muscle. Okay, probably should give a name for this. No, this is muscle organization. Okay. Now, if we, again, the muscle, right? Cut it, and then I take a look at it like this. So if I take a look at this surface, what you will see is there's going to be individual bundles, like this. Okay, so some bundles are bigger than others. So each of these each of these little circles, that is called a fascicle. Fascicle. And I'll tell you what a fascicle is in a second. Okay, fascicle. So one fascicle here, another fascicle, another fascicle, another fascicle, so on and so forth. Okay. So the fascicles are going to be surrounded by another layer of connective tissue. Okay, so there is one connective tissue surrounding the fascicle, another, and another. So all these things will be surrounded by the pink thing I'm drawing right now. Okay. So listen carefully for this next part. This is where it gets a little bit confusing. You know how I did not shade in the entire blue? Okay, like it's supposed to be there, but then I didn't shade in because I want to show you what happens if you cut away a little bit of the epimysium. If you cut away a little bit of the epimysium, if you cut away a little bit of the epimysium, right beneath the epimysium is going to be this pink connective tissue. Okay, because that's the stuff that is surrounding the individual fascicle, right? So what do we call this? What do we call this? This is the perimysium. Okay, so this is connective tissue. Connective tissue that covers each fascicle. I'll tell you what a fascicle is in a second. Okay. So it contains blood vessels and nerves. Okay. Now, the best analogy I could come up with is this. Okay. If you think about a crayon, right? I don't have a crayon with me. My daughter's crayon are all upstairs. But if you think about a crayon, okay, like a crayon here. Okay, crayon. You know how crayons have a little paper thing that goes around them? Okay, so you can think about the little paper thing as the perimysium. Okay, and then the crayon would be like a fascicle or something. Okay, so if you think about like a whole pack of crayons, okay, a whole pack of crayons, a whole pack of crayons. Okay, this pack of crayons would come in a box, right? In a box. Okay, let me draw the box. Come in a box. Okay. So the box would be kind of like the entire muscle. Okay. And then if you cut open the box, if you just like, cut an opening here and take that away, immediately you will be looking at the paper wrapping that surrounds each of the crayons, right? So in the same way, if you peel away the epimysium, the box, you will immediately see the wrappings of each of the fascicle. Does that make any sense? Okay, like the paper wrapping is kind of like these ones, right? Okay, so if you cut away the box, the epimysium, you will see the paper wrapping. Any question so far? Are we together on this thing or have I lost you? Seriously, no question? Okay. Well, you know what we're going to do next? What we're going to do next is we're going to pull out a fascicle. I'm going to take one of these things and I'm going to pull it out. Okay, and we're going to take a look at what it's made up of. Okay, fascicle. So remember, this whole fascicle is surrounded by, this whole fascicle is surrounded by the perimysium. Okay, perimysium like that. Okay. So what is a fascicle? Well, the fascicle actually is made up of a bunch of smaller things as well. Okay, this never ends. Okay. So these little things, each one of these are called muscle fibers. Okay. So one muscle fiber is equivalent to one muscle cell. Okay. So muscle fiber, that's a muscle cell. So what is a fascicle then? A fascicle is a bundle of muscle fiber. Okay, a bundle of muscle fiber. So that's one muscle cell, another muscle cell, another muscle cell, so on and so forth. Okay. Now, if you eat meat, you know how meat, sometimes you can shred it into little pieces. Like if you think about like pulled pork sandwich, or like if you think about, shredding the chickens to make chicken salad, or even beef, right? Beef is probably the easiest to visualize, okay, if you eat meat, right? Then you can peel it into little strands, right? So each of the strands that we peel out, right, that's a fascicle. That's a fascicle. Okay, so when you take your beef, peel it out one by one, take your pork, peel it one by one, those little shreds, that's a fascicle. And each of those fascicle will be surrounded by the paramecium. Okay, so within that tiny, tiny thread of fascicle, inside are going to be a bunch of muscle cells. Okay. Now, I know this is getting confusing, perhaps, but if we take a look at the muscle cells, each of the muscle cells is going to be surrounded by another layer of connective tissue, okay, which is shown here by the green. Okay. So that layer that I'm drawing, that is called the endomysium. Okay. And it surrounds, it's a connective tissue, obviously, connective tissue. Connective tissue that surrounds each individual muscle fiber. Okay, muscle cell. Muscle fiber is same as muscle cell, just like a neuron is same as a nerve cell. Okay. And I promise we're just going to do this one more time. We're going to pull this out one last time. Actually, you know what? Maybe not. We have to pull it one more time after this. There we go. Okay. So what is this? This is a muscle cell, right? Muscle fiber. Okay. So what do you expect to have on a muscle fiber? Well, I told you already. We are going to have the endomysium surrounding it. Okay. But I'm not going to color the whole way. I'm not going to color the entire way. If I peel away the endomysium, right, you will see that this is actually surrounded by cell membrane. Right? So you're going to have a cell membrane right here. Let me choose a lighter color for you. There is going to be a cell membrane. Okay. That surrounds the muscle cell. It's a very long, okay, the muscle cell, it's not like your typical circular cell, okay? Like it's very, very, very long, okay? So this is surrounded by the cell membrane, okay? Cell membrane. Okay, but because we're talking about muscle, we kind of give it like a special name. It is called the sarcolemma. It's the same thing, but special name for muscle. Okay. Does anyone have any questions, seriously, of what's going on here? Okay, so on the inside, we have the cytoplasm, right? Okay, or the sarcoplasm. And one last time, within the entire cytoplasm, you're going to have many, many, many smaller things. Okay, I'm just gonna pull one last one out. Okay, so this one last one out. This is gonna be called a myofibril. Okay, myofibril, which is the contractile unit of muscle. Okay. So the myofibril is actually separated into many repeating units. Okay, so each one of this is called a sarcomere. Now, explain in a second. And it consists of 2 proteins. Okay, actin and myosin. Okay, and it kind of looks like this. Now, just one last thing, I promise. Covering the myofibril is going to be these endoplasmic reticulum. Okay, endoplasmic reticulum, right here. Okay. Which again has a special name, sarcoplasmic. It's basically the same name, but they replaced the front with sarco. Okay, sarcoplasmic reticulum. Okay, and what's important is in the sarcoplasmic reticulum, it contains lots of calcium. And that's going to be important in a bit. Lots of calcium. Okay. So that's the organization of muscle. It's kind of like those, you know, Russian dolls where you open up and then there is another door inside and then you open up and then another doll, so on and so forth. So that's kind of like that. You keep on pulling them out from the gross level. This is what you can see all the way to the microscopic level. Any question before we move on?
Sarah, can you try to zoom out so we can see the entire image?
Of course. Yeah, but I don't know if you can see the text though. But there it is. Okay. All right, let's take a look at this 3D thing and see and you know see it from a 3D model perspective. So there is the bone. There's the tendon. The tendon is part of the epimysium. Okay, so you can see, you know, 1, 2, 3, all these things, right? So what's one of these things? Look at the diagram that we just draw. What is this thing I'm going?
Fascicle.
That is the fascicle. Very good. So fascicle is a bundle of muscle fiber, right? A bundle of muscle cells. So that's a muscle cell there, muscle cell, muscle cell. Each of these little red shaped things, that's a muscle cell. Okay, so surrounding the entire muscle is the epimysium, but surrounding the fascicle is this whitish stuff in this diagram. That's the perimysium. Okay, and that's where you will find things like blood vessels, right? You can see here. There's no nerve shown, but there are going to be a lot of motor nerve endings, right, to control the contraction of the muscle. So we pull out a fascicle. That's a fascicle that got pulled out. Oh my goodness. Okay, so within the fascicle, right, this thing is this. This little muscle fiber. That's a muscle fiber. Okay, and you pull out the muscle fiber, and you can see the muscle fiber is surrounded by the sarcolemma. Okay, what is not shown in this picture is outside the sarcolemma, outside the cell membrane, there is also the endomysium. Okay, so epimysium surrounds the entire muscle, perimysium surrounds the fascicle, and then the endomysium surrounds the individual muscle fiber, the individual muscle cells. Okay, so there's a sarcolemma, the cell membrane. So you're going to have a motor neuron coming down the axon. Okay, and in here you can see there are these vesicles which contains the neurotransmitters for communication between the motor neuron and the muscle. Okay, the neurotransmitter, which we'll go into later, is the acetylcholine, and that will cause the channels to open on the surface of the cell membrane, which would then send an electrical signal throughout the sarcoplasmic reticulum. Okay, I should mention that at the end of the sarcoplasmic reticulum, there are these tubes called the T tubes. I'll show you in the PowerPoint in a second. But basically, the T tubes, the T tubules, helps spread the action potential down the sarcoplasmic reticulum, and that will release the calcium. Okay, I'll tell you what the calcium does later on. Now I'm gonna go over here and rotate it, try to rotate it. Okay, so you can see that's the sarcoplasmic reticulum, and these are the myofibrils. Okay, they didn't pull it out, but if you were to pull it out, you will be able to see the individual sarcomere. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense. It shows you, layer by layer what gets pulled out and how this actually works. Is that okay? All right, either you guys understand it or I have completely lost you and you don't even know what to ask. I am going to assume it is the former. Okay, so let's go through the PowerPoint slides with the description. So one more time, right? The epimysium surrounds the entire muscle, whereas the perimysium covers a bundle of muscle fiber, right? But we know now that a bundle of muscle fiber is called a fascicle, okay? The pole pork that I was talking about. And then the endomysium covers the individual muscle fiber, and a muscle fiber is basically a single muscle cell. Very long though, okay? And of course the tendon attach the muscle to the bone, okay? The tendon is also covered by the epimysium. Okay. This chart just shows you some of the fancy names that we're using. Instead of cell membrane, we call it sarcolemma. Right? Cytoplasm is sarcoplasm. Endoplasmic reticulum is the sarcoplasmic reticulum. Okay. So just to reiterate, this is the muscle fiber, muscle cell. And the sarcolemma, which is cell membrane, there are going to be little holes here and there. Okay, and the hole is going to form these T tubules. Okay, that will go throughout the sarcoplasm. Okay, so that's the T tubules. And connecting to the T tubules are these networks of endoplasmic reticulum, right? Okay, or sarcoplasmic reticulum. Okay, so as you saw briefly in the animation, when the action potential comes, it will spread down the T tubules, and the T tubules will pass it into the sarcoplasmic reticulum where the calcium are stored. Okay, so when there's no signal, the calcium will stay within the sarcoplasmic reticulum, but when the action potential comes, the sarcoplasmic reticulum will release the calcium. And then that leads to a bunch of stuff that I'll talk about in a second. Okay. So this is the diagram again. So actually, I want to go back to this study guide, and I'm going to go to the end here, and we will fill this in together. Okay, I'll give you a moment to find that page. It's at the end, I believe. There is the muscle. If you want to, you know what, let's label it together. Why not one more time? Just so it will help you remember it. Okay. You know what? Actually, maybe you should do it yourself, okay? Because I think you need to internalize this on your own and then label it, okay? But you know, you can see the fascicle here, you can see the muscle fiber and the myofibrils, right? Okay, so you figure it out yourself and label it. If you need help, you can send me your pic. If you label it, you're not sure if it's right or not, take a picture, send it to me. I'll verify for you. Okay, so this is the entire skeletal muscle. What surrounds the skeletal muscle? So what I'm going to put here, surrounded by epimysium. Okay, that's this stuff right here. Epimysium. Epi is outside. Okay, you get the point. What does it contain? What does the skeletal muscle contain? It contains the fascicle. Okay, so that's a fascicle. That's a fascicle. So on and so forth. Okay, next, if you take out a fascicle, what is the fascicle surrounded by? Help me out here, guys. Let me know you're with me. What should I fill in?
Perimysium.
Perimysium, that's right, perimysium. Okay, so that's the perimysium. What does it contain? What are these little things? That is the muscle fiber, AKA muscle cell. One muscle fiber, one muscle cell. Tons of nuclei though, okay? Unlike other cells, because it's so long, the muscle fiber, there are many, many nuclei as opposed to just one. And if you pull out one muscle fiber is surrounded by the endomysium. Immediately below the endomysium is going to be your sarcolemma, right? I'm just gonna put it right here to remind you, the cell membrane, sarcolemma. And these individual thingy-majiggies, those are the myofibrils. If you pull one out, they are surrounded by sarcoplasmic reticulum plus T tubules. Okay, I will color them for you. Okay, let's write it in orange. T tubules. So you see, these are the T tubules. It will continue. It got cut off in the diagram to show you what's beneath. Okay, and then you have the sarcoplasmic reticulum, which is these things. What does it contain? What does a myofibril contain? Last question. Sarcomere. Okay. Is that okay? You know what? Sorry, I think I have been spelling it wrong the whole time. Sarco, not sacro. Sarcomere, sarcoplasmic reticulum. Sorry. Sarco. SARCO for all of them. Okay, that's that. Could you zoom out? Okay, sure. There you go. Take a picture. Wonderful. Okay, so let's go back to here. This is just another view, right, of the entire muscle fiber. Right, so you can see all the T tubules. Eventually, the T tubules all goes up to the top, right, with the opening. Right, so what's gonna happen is you're gonna have a motor neuron coming in like this, motor neuron. Okay, and this here is called a neuromuscular junction. So in the animation, we see that, we're gonna have the neurotransmitter coming out. And once the neurotransmitter is released, it will cause action potential to spread throughout the entire muscle cell through these T tubules. Okay, we're gonna get to that in a second. What I want you to see in this picture is you have the myofibrils. Okay, it's made up of two things, right? The thin and the thick filament. Okay, the thick one is the myosin that we talked about, and the thin one is the actin. This is not the first time you heard about actin. Oh, sorry, actually, it might be. I got confused with my first semester. But in the first semester, you learn about actin fibers, right? In the cell organelles, right? Actins are these microfibers that you will find as part of your cytoskeleton, right? So it also is a major component of your muscle. Okay, so we have the actin and myosin, which makes up a sarcomere. So here, that's one sarcomere. And you have thousands of them connected end to end. Okay. Of course, there are all your normal stuff, right? Your mitochondria, right? Your ER, probably have some Golgi as well. Okay, so the sarcoplasmic reticulum encases hundreds and sometimes even thousands of myofibrils, which are bundles of myofilament. Okay, and the myofilaments are the actin and the myosin that we talked about. Okay, so the sarcomere connect end to end. The thick one is the myosin, as I said. The thin one is actin. That's the major one. But on top of the actin, there are two other ones, the tropomyosin and the troponin, which I'll explain in a second. Okay, but just remember myosin and actin as thick and thin for now. Okay, so here is the sliding filament theory. I'm going to keep it simple for you. Not going to go into too much detail, but here is an actin. Okay, all these red balls, that's the actin filament. Okay, so for the muscle to contract, what needs to happen is the myosin has to grab onto the actin and pull. Okay, so let me see if there is let me see if I can explain it on the on this OneNote thing here. Okay, I try to find a nice animation for it, but everything is like way too much details, so it's gonna get confusing if we look at it. But you don't have to draw this. You can just try to visualize this. Okay, so there is the hold on. Sorry, let me try this one more time. Okay, let's just do 3 for short. Keep it simple. Okay, that's the actin. Okay, so This here is a sarcomere. Yeah. And then you will have the myosin, which is the thick one, right? Okay, so I'm gonna choose a thick one here. That's the myosin. That's the myosin. Okay. So at the end of the myosin, you're gonna have some heads. Okay, this is called myosin head. Okay. And what happens is the myosin head, they will grab onto the actin. Right? So think of this as the head. They grab onto the actin and then they pull, and then they let go, and then they grab again and pull, let go, grab and pull. So it's like rowing a boat. Okay, keep on doing this. When the myosin grabs on the actin and pull, then this is gonna get shortened. Okay, so afterwards, what it will look like is this. Okay, you will have a shorter sarcomere. Okay, like this. Do you understand? Okay. So by having the myosin pulling on the actin towards the inside, it will cause the sarcomere to shorten. Shortened sarcomere. Okay. And that's how you create muscle contraction. Okay. Every time you shorten the sarcomere, and we're talking about like hundreds and thousands of these sarcomere shortening, right? That will cause the muscle to pull, and that pulling, that contraction creates movements. Okay, so when you're done contracting, you let go, and it's almost like a spring. It will go back to normal length. Okay, so contraction is essentially the interaction between the myosin and the actin. Okay, so how does the myosin grab onto the actin? Well, let's go back to this diagram. Okay. This is the actin, and you can see in this picture the yellow stuff with the head. Those are the myosin head that will grab onto the actin and pull. But before you can do that, the actin actually have these binding sites, these active sites for actin to for myosin to grab onto it. Okay, but the active sites, the little black circles here, those binding sites are normally covered. Okay, because you don't want a muscle to contract unless you tell it to, right? Okay, so all those binding sites are covered by this green ribbon looking thing. That green ribbon is the tropomyosin. Okay, so tropomyosin here, it covers the active site on actin. Okay, when the active sites are covered, myosin cannot bind. Okay, so myosin cannot bind. What controls the position of the tropomyosin? Okay, the position of the green thing, the position of the tropomyosin, is controlled by another protein called the troponin. Okay, so troponin controls the position of the tropomyosin. Okay. When there are no calcium around, the troponin would cause the tropomyosin to cover up the active sites. So no contraction. But when the action potential comes, when the signal spreads throughout the T tubules and the sarcoplasmic reticulum, the calcium will be released from the sarcoplasmic reticulum. Once the calcium is released, they will bind to the troponin, which would then roll away the tropomyosin. By rolling away the tropomyosin, you expose the binding site, which would then allow the myosin to grab onto. Okay, so this cycle is, I mean, you can read about it. Don't worry about the details too much. The key idea is the myosin head, as soon as the active site is exposed, they will grab onto it, they will pull, and then an ATP comes and tells it to let go. and then it grabs it again, pull, let go. Right, so just keep on doing this motion, and then it will pull the actin fibers towards the center and creates contraction. Okay, so this causes the fiber to slide past each other, which is why it's called the sliding filament theory. Any question about this? Okay. So this is a more sophisticated picture. You can see all the blue ones here. What are the blue ones? Is it actin or myosin? Tell me out.
Myosin.
That is the myosin, the thicker one, right? And then we have the actin. Okay, don't worry about all these Z line, A band, I band. We didn't talk about it. But you can see the sarcomere from end to end. This is one sarcomere. When the myosin pulls on it, it gets shorter. There are more overlap, right? It's important to know that during contraction, the myofilaments, the actin and the myosin, don't change length. Okay, what changes is the amount of overlap changes. Okay, so you see less overlap here, and then after pulling, more overlap. And so the entire myofibril gets shortened. Okay, so this whole thing is a myofibril, okay, which is made up of microfilaments, the actin and the myosin. Okay. All right, muscle contractions, we did that already. Now we talk about how the signal comes. Okay, so like I said, right, we started with the motor neuron. Okay, if this is a voluntary movement, it starts in the brain, in the primary motor cortex, right? Okay, primary motor cortex sends a signal down the descending track of the spinal cord, okay, and then it's going to exit through the spinal nerve, and the motor neuron is going to form these neuromuscular junction that I told you about with the muscle fibers. Okay, so this is skeletal muscle. You can see that's a fascicle right here. So these are individual muscle cells. So a single motor neuron can make connections with hundreds and thousands of these muscle fibers. Okay, and you need it, right? Like if you lift something heavy, you need to have a bunch of muscle fibers to produce enough force for that lift, right? Okay, one fiber is too weak to produce enough force. So collectively, right, they are under the control of one motor neuron. Okay, so the motor neuron will release, the neurotransmitters that causes an action potential to occur within the muscle fibers. Okay, so the neurotransmitter used is the acetylcholine, or ACH for short. Acetylcholine. Okay, so it's a neurotransmitter for communication between motor neurons and muscle. Okay, and then all that signal will spread down the T tubules and to the sarcoplasmic reticulum, and then it will release calcium. Okay, and I'm just going to write out a few more steps for you. Calcium binds to troponin, which rolls away the tropomyosin, exposing active sites on actin for myosin to grab onto. Okay, Once it's exposed, it's grab, pull, let go, grab, pull, let go. Right? This will continue to happen as long as you have calcium coming in. Okay? And the calcium will keep on be releasing as long as there is a action potential coming from the motor neuron. Okay? Once you want to stop moving that muscle, then the signal stops. Okay? Without the stimulation, the calcium will get reabsorbed back into the sarcoplasmic reticulum, and the contraction stops immediately. Okay. So, you know, I keep on saying grab, pull, and then let go, right? It's important to remember the letting go part requires ATP. Okay, so you grab, pull, and then ATP comes and tells you to let go. Okay, and then that resets the myosin head so it can grab again. So when a person dies, there are no more ATP. Right, so basically the muscle grabs on, the myosin grabs on and pull, and it's not going to be able to let go. Right, so you might have heard of the term rigor mortis, right, which is the stiffening of the muscle after the person dies. And that's the reason, okay? Because without the ATP, muscle cannot let go, the contraction cannot let go, so it stiffens up. Okay? Eventually, it will let go after a while, but it's gonna stiff up for the first couple of days. Okay? So that is the situation. Okay, so let's take a look at a few motor neuron disorder. There is polio, which I'm sure you've heard of. A polio virus infects and kills motor neurons. The virus specifically infects the motor neurons, causing the motor neuron to degenerate. Without the motor neuron, you are not going to be able to control your muscle, right? And so it could result in paralysis. Okay. Some of the motor neurons is going to control things like, your breathing and stuff like that. So if those are damaged, then, you could die. Polio mainly affects children under the age of 5, and 1 in 200 infections leads to irreversible paralysis. And amongst those who are paralyzed, 5 to 10% will die because their breathing muscle becomes immobilized. Fortunately, there is a vaccine for polio. And the Gates and Melinda Foundation, like Bill Gates and his ex-wife now, I guess, they had a foundation that pours a lot of money into creating distributing the polio vaccines to parts of the world where polio is still a problem. It's not a problem for like Western country because most people are vaccinated from it. And one of their goal is to eradicate polio completely, okay, just like we did for smallpox. But some of these places, a lot of regions are actually controlled by terrorist groups, and so they interfere with the distribution of vaccines. So still not there, but it's if there is a next disease that we can eradicate, it's likely to be polio. Okay, do you guys know who this is? Anybody know who this person is? Famous person? Probably have seen him.
Stephen Hawking.
Yes, that is Stephen Hawking, right? Famous physicist. He passed away, I think 2 years ago. But he is diagnosed with something called ALS, okay, or amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, which is a hereditary condition. It's like an autoimmune disease that the motor neurons are being targeted. So he was diagnosed at a very young age, and they tell him he only had like a couple years to live, but he lives a very long and productive life actually. So he eventually loses control of all the muscles in his body, except for a small muscle in his cheek that he can still control, and that's what he uses to control his wheelchair and his speech synthesizer. Okay, there was actually a movie, right? I think it's called The Theory of Everything. That kind of depicts, his life. You might be interested in seeing that, but that's a motor neuron disorder. Botulism and tetanus. That's caused by bacteria. Botulism or botulinum toxin, okay, Anybody have heard of botulinum before? Like Botox, you might have heard of Botox, right? So Botox is the stuff that people inject underneath their skin to make their skin like wrinkle-free or something, right? And that's derived from the same bacteria, okay, that creates botulinum toxin. So botulinum toxin is actually going to kill you if you ingest it. It's created by like an anaerobic bacteria. So even without oxygen, they can thrive. And it's the toxin that kills you. So if there is a food product that's contaminated with a botulism, you won't be able to get rid of it by cooking it. Cooking it will kill the bacteria, but it will not destroy the toxin. Okay, so what happens is the botulinum toxin will stop the motor neuron from releasing the acetylcholine. Remember, the acetylcholine is the neurotransmitter that allows the neuron to communicate with your muscle, right? To cause them to contract. So if the botulinum toxin blocks the release of ACH, essentially the neuron cannot communicate with the muscle, and you become paralyzed. Okay? And again, what we are really concerned about is if the communication between the motor neuron and the breathing muscle cease, like your diaphragm, for example, you cannot contract it, then you die from it, right? Okay, so it's very potent toxin at very low dose. It could cause a paralysis. So I think they dilute it a lot and then they inject it into the skin, and it causes the muscle to kind of relax, right? So by relaxing, like you're not gonna see the wrinkles, right? Like, I mean, if you look at my forehead, you only see the wrinkles if I like, move my forehead, right? So if you cannot move the muscle, if you get paralyzed with low dose of these botulinum, then the wrinkles go away. Okay, so it's something that people do. It's funny because where I live, there is a little plaza, and every time I drive by, I see this big sign that says Botox for just $5. I don't know about that. $5 for something so toxic. I probably want something a little bit more, controlled, if you would. Next, we have the tetanus. Okay, tetanus is a toxin that is also released by bacteria, and this one, it blocks the release of neurotransmitter that inhibits motor neuron. Okay, so this one prevents the motor neurons from communicating with the muscle. This one, it blocks the neurotransmitter that stops the motor neuron. So normally you wanna have some kind of brakes on your motor neurons because you don't want to contract everything, right? Like when you're walking, right? For example, if you move your right legs, you want the left leg to not move, right? To be anchored, right? So you need to have some kind of negative inhibition on those motor neurons. And what happens is the tetanus will stop that. And so what happens is the muscle will be stiffened and it cannot release from contraction. Okay, so tetanus is also called locked jaws, right? Because the person is stiffened up, they cannot move at all. And this is like a typical picture. If you search tetanus Google image, you will guarantee to see this picture. It's like an artist who drew the soldiers in World War II when they're infected with tetanus because they stay in the trenches for a very long time to get infected through the boots or something, and they are locked in this particular position. Ruby asks, how does botulinum toxin exit from the body? If you have botulinum toxin, then you would need to get a serum, right? We talk about this in the immune system, right? So like a serum is going to help neutralize the toxin. You can't really get rid of it yourself. You need to, get medical attention. So remember, like I told you, I got bitten by the dog, right? And I also got a tetanus shot because apparently the dog's saliva can carry the bacteria that secretes the tetanus toxin. So that's why I needed that as well. Okay, last two slides. Hang in there, people. Types of muscle fibers. Okay, muscle fibers are the same as muscle cells, right? So there are two types. One is called like slow twitch fibers, and then the other is called a fast twitch fibers. Okay, so slow twitch fibers, they contract slowly, okay, but they could go on and on for a very, very long time. Okay, so the slow twitch fibers are good for endurance activity. Okay, like long distance running or cycling. They can work for a very long time without getting tired. All your postural muscle are going to have a high percentage of slow twitch muscle fiber. Okay, like I have been sitting here for like, I don't know, 2 hours, and I presumably you're sitting here in front of a computer for 2 hours listening to me as well. But you're like you might be like mentally tired, but like you're not physically tired. Like, you know, like not like, oh, I've been sitting for so long, like I'm my muscle are so getting sore, right? It's not, because all these postural muscles that are supporting you, for example, your trapezius. We didn't learn any of the muscle names because it's very difficult, but you know, that's called the trapezius, right? Your lower back, right? Your latissimus dorsi, all those postural muscles, they're going to have a lot of slow twitch fiber. They create slow force over a long period of time without getting tired. Again, the reason they could do that is because they contain something called myoglobin. Okay, and myoglobin is even better than hemoglobin in delivering oxygen. Okay, and so as long as you have a steady supply of oxygen to these slow twitch fiber, you are going to be able to contract for a very long time without getting tired. Okay, and these myoglobin gives them like a more reddish color, and that's why sometimes muscle that has a lot of slow twitch fiber, we call them dark meat or red meat. Okay, so if you think about like the cows, right? Like they stand there all day and don't get tired, right? So all the meats are like red meat. Okay, if you think about like turkey breast, turkey breasts are sorry, red meat, okay, dark meat, because turkeys can fly, right? And to fly, right? You don't want to fly a little bit and then get too tired and then, you know, fall down or something. So that red meat is going to be able to sustain the flight. As opposed to chicken, right? Chicken breast is white meat, right? They are not going to be able to, you know, to fly. Chickens don't fly, by the way. Salmon is also dark meat, right? Salmon swim against the current. They don't want to get tired easily. So lots of slow twitch fiber. Yeah, dark meats are best for our health if you eat a lot of it, right? We're not talking about like good or bad in terms of like consumption. We're talking about what they are good for. So I'm not saying if you eat a lot of beef, you are gonna increase your endurance. What I'm saying is the muscle that has a lot of slow twitch fibers, those are good for endurance. Okay, so if you want to run a marathon or something, then you need to have higher slow twitch fibers. The fast twitch fibers, they are good for like bursts of energy, okay, rapid movement, like jumping to catch a ball, sprinting to catch a bus, right? Like if you go a full sprint to catch a bus, you won't be able to go on forever. Like after a minute of full speed sprinting, right, 2 minutes at tops, then you have to slow down, right? Your muscles start to get sore, right? That's because those sprinting muscles, they are fast twitch fibers. Okay, they're not good for endurance. They don't have the myoglobin. Okay, so things like you know, like a cod or something, or tilapia, they don't swim for very long distance. Okay, but when a predator comes, they need to be able to dash out of the way quickly. So that burst of energy, that dash away, that is going to be that's going to have, you know, a lot of the fast twitch fibers. Mohammed said maybe cheetah has fast twitch muscle. Yeah, so they, you know, cheetah is very good at running really fast for quite a long time to catch their whatever, right, prey, zebra or something. So those animals probably will have more of the fast twitch fibers to give them that burst of energy. Okay, but eventually they have to stop. If you watch it on like the Discovery channels or animal channels, whatever, right, they cannot keep on chasing the prey forever. They have to slow down eventually. And chicken breasts, right? Like I said, chickens don't fly, so their breast meat are white meats. Okay, they just flap a little bit to kind of get away from you, and then they have to stop. Okay, so that's fast twitch and slow twitch. Okay, and that's it. Let's go back to the PowerPoint here. Sorry, the worksheets, and fill in what we've missed, and then we'll send you on your way. Just basically what we talked about, right? Like, oh, sorry, there is more questions at the top here, I think. There. Name 3 types of muscles. So we have skeletal muscle. Can't spell today, sorry. Skeletal muscle, which are the ones that you can voluntarily control. Smooth muscle, which we did not talk about at all. Those are the ones that you do not voluntarily control. So things that moves food in your intestines, right? Those are smooth muscles, muscles that controls the diameter of your blood vessels. Those are smooth muscles. And the third type, anybody know the third type? Skeletal.
Cardiac.
Cardiac is correct. Those are only found in the heart. Okay, also non-voluntary. Muscle with high % of fast twitch fibers are best for, bursts of energy. I said bursts of energy. Okay. Quick, short use. Okay. Sprinting, catching a ball, jumping out of the way when something dangerous is going towards you. High percentage of slow twitch fibers. This is for endurance. Okay. Postural support. I should note that it's not fixed. Okay, like you could train. Right? So like if you just run for like 5 minutes a day, and then next week you'll be able to run for 10 minutes a day, and then if you keep on increasing it, then after a month maybe you'll be able to run for half an hour. Right? So in that process, you are converting some of the fast twitch fibers into slow twitch fibers. Okay, the body is quite adaptable in that respect. Okay, filling in the blanks. Connective tissue that surrounds the entire muscle. I must have said it like 5-6 times. Right? The epimysium. Surrounds the fascicle is the perimysium. Surround the individual fibers, that's the myomysium. Contractile unit of the skeletal muscle is the sarcomere, okay? Or the myofibrils, but the myofibrils are made up of the sarcomeres. And the 2 main proteins are the actin and myosin. Okay, that is that. That is all. Okay, thank you very much for coming. Don't forget you have a quiz next week for the kidneys. And the kidney quiz, like I said, there are 2 attempts, right? Okay, and it's going to be the average of the 2 attempts. Okay, so make sure you are aware of that. Okay, have a good week. I will see you next week, same time. Bye for now.